If you look at a body count system and you see if that's the only thing that counts, right? The body count. If that's what rewards and punishments are distributed by, if that's your ethic, and if your own command doesn't really care whether you survive, then clearly you're in a world where anything goes.
It becomes a brutalized war for survival.
It becomes a war for survival or a war to hold on to your ethics. I think a good example of this, Oliver Stone's movie Platoon, which is currently in releasement, shows a U.S. military unit that's severely divided between one group who commits atrocities and others who thinks it's a horrible, horrible situation. And I think that's a good illustration of probably the kind of dynamics that occurred in many, many units. It isn't as if everyone is a killer or a sadist. It's as if you're in a structure where a significant component of your troops engage in such behavior, but not everyone.
So it seems that then, you know, we talk about atrocities and we talk about my lai. When you use that term atrocity,
it applies an exception to the rule. That's not a good way to look at it here.
But my lai and atrocities were just business as usual.
Yes. My lai seems a little well organized, particularly well organized, but certainly My Lai wasn't the only village in Vietnam that was burned down and where everybody inside it was shot. That is not true at all.
In fact, Bill, it was precisely this inability on the ground war to distinguish between friend and foe, VC and peasant farmer, that led to the next dimension of Technowar, the pacification programs. The fact that they weren't able to tell who the enemy was meant that they had to clear out the whole countryside.
Certainly. Simply, if you can't tell friend from foe, then you depopulate the countryside and move them into concentration camps and move them into urban slums. It's not easy to depopulate a countryside. There are several major techniques. One is defoliating. You simply destroy the food base of the country. And this is where Agent Orange comes in. Agent Orange and Agent Blue and Agent White were sprayed on millions of acres of cropland. Other millions of acres of forest were defoliated. So with the food base gone, people have to move. Secondly, certainly bombing attacks on villages, which were quite extensive, encourage people to move. And then third, actual search and destroy operations where villages, some of which everyone is killed, others of which you simply surround the village, move everyone out, then burn up the village and remove them. These three modes. Millions and millions of Vietnamese lost their homes and were sent to concentration camps into urban slums. And what's so interesting is the Americans saw this as progress. This was urbanization. Rural is bad, urban is good. So even though they have nothing, it was brought as seen as a sign of progress to bring Vietnamese in where you could show them TV and make them work in American bases and so on and so forth. It was seen as having a more sophisticated job than being a peasant farmer.
This is also part of that same syndrome of not seeing the enemy as a culture or as individuals or people, but seeing them just as mirror images of ourselves. Like the bombing of North Vietnam was supposed to hurt them if they destroyed their capacity to have consumer goods.
Certainly, and so the same idea, you would think from the American perspective that no Vietnamese cared about their home, that they didn't care about their land and their dog and their ancestors' grave and their rice fields and their trees, that instead simply just to have this new good, have this, quote, consumer good or live in the urban area, that in itself was just an unmitigated good. You're right, people's lives were not important. The human dimension was completely lost. And instead, in Americans then, we can count how many TVs were imported this month, how many Hondas.
Yeah,
so the logic of Technowar was inapplicable to Vietnam in a way.
Certainly, that's exactly. It could, in many ways, it created tremendous destruction, but it could not stop a very powerfully united people who were trying to change their lives.